Hey there, folks. At the moment today, I'm going to be talking about something which is pretty close to my heart, and it's basically the let's call it the barbarians at the gates, and this is the destruction of basically books, which are the core issue of it. But it's basically the means to effectively purge any information which contravenes the official narrative, and it's going on around us systematically in a number of levels. The first one is the issue we'll stick with the books, which is, again, I've got a website below here with the links on it, which lists all the libraries that have been shut down in New Zealand basically over the last, roughly about the last 12 months to 2 years. They all follow the same format. The libraries are either closed because of, say, earthquake damage or because of toxic mold. And they're interesting because if we look at the example of the libraries and galleries that have been subject to this, the example of the Southland Art Gallery, what we see is a really interesting situation where we had Claire Headley, who's was the CEO for the Nelson City Council, previously from the local government of New Zealand, which is a strange little lobbying group out there, which doesn't really actually have any government attachments, but seems to run around telling all the governments what they should be doing. And she basically said, "Oh, we need to shut down the Trafalgar Centre in Nelson." And all the old guys who sort of, always you go to meetings and go, "No, no, don't want to shut them. No, I want to ask one more question. Remember this stuff?" And they said, "Well, no, it's perfectly fine. Your literature says it's pilings of the Stephen blah." Turned out, clearly said, "No, that's not the case." Turned out she was right. And then she went down to Southland and did exactly the same thing. Max Oti, I think it is, who's one of the master carvers down in Southland, confirmed to me what I'd also been suspecting, which was that it's not just that these libraries have been closed, but material has been looted. He reminds me of going to Papa and seeing the front of the meeting house, the whare, from Riverton down at Te Papa, and said, "Well, what's this doing here?" Because he's down from that part of the country. He wrote to them and got no reply. I'll come back to that because they're kind of significant because of where their archive is and what was built on it and what those guys are doing. But basically, we're seeing, on top of this, these closures, is that we're seeing cases like the Fine Arts Collection in Auckland University, the best collection in the country, was basically said, "Oh, we're going to shut this down, we're going to amalgamate it to all the other libraries, and we're going to," I think it was 10,000 books, it might even be more, but they said they're going to burn. That was put out in Radio New Zealand. Everyone got very like, "What you got to do? You're going to burn books?" And they came back and said, "Oh, no, we're going to shred them." That in turn, there was a protest out there. The protest made the TV, but nobody on watching the 6 o'clock news realised that all the students sitting inside the library having to sit in were protesting because of the destruction of these books. That was the most insignificant part was actually left out of it. The spin-off has just recently published another report saying that another cull is about to take place of over 600,000 books in the National Archives. Again, the internal documentations they provide show the fact that this was done very quietly and that this will lead to the destruction of books. So there's no attempt to even give these books another home. That's the pretext they don't have the room, whatever. They're just going to purge it. Meanwhile, we also discover that schools around the country can no longer access these national archives and they'll be directed to online sources. Of course, online sources can be digitally altered using algorithms and various different methodologies, so that what's there today isn't there tomorrow, or it can be deleted or changed or altered. And I've seen that happen lots of time. The whole point of archives is they provide primary material that cannot be altered or mended with. Now, it's not new for years. Like as my own book, State Secrets, so I sold 15,000 copies. I've been aware that book has been slowly being whittled out of the libraries. At one point, at its peak, you go into Dunedin City Library and there'd be 8 copies of it in the central collections, and now there's one only in the New Zealand room, and I imagine that won't be there much longer. So basically, what's happening is any book that challenges the official narrative that's been pushed today is being purged. We're also seeing that materials actually getting siphoned off, and they're heading up to the National Archives and up in Wellington. That's a little place which is by the Memorial Base, and it used to be the location of what they call the New Zealand Broadcasting Centre, which Toby Treadell in his archive, Wellington Confidential, another one of these fantastic signs you can only get for a National Archive. Imagine won't be there anymore because it'll be one of the things that gets purged out, all the valuable information about the old National Party links and all the dodgy things which, you know, are good for researchers like me to find out that you don't find online. Gone. Imagine things like Owen Wilkes' book Protests 1973, which has all the, you know, dodgy things Americans actually up to in New Zealand 1970s, gone. Um, so this is where it was called the New Zealand Broadcasting Limited, which has recently become Cordia. Got a long story there, but basically Cordia is another organisation running around doing a very good job of basically assimilating all our news into one source. So you may have heard the stories about the fact that TV3 will be bought out, Radio New Zealand is going to be merged with TVNZ, and at the same time Channel 7 is looking at basically, well, in fact Sky Television, who's the same ones that are looking at buying TV3 out, are behind network to basically produce a whole bunch of content which will be put out into a Pacific-based channel, which New Zealand and Australian government will pay for, but containing Sky 7 material. So that's what all the Pacific people. So anything that's, you know, again, challenging the natural medicines, opposing pharmaceutical companies, all that will be gone. And that's what we're actually basically witnessing. At the same time, online, we're up against things like software, like Palantir. Like when people talk about Cambridge Analytica and the use of bots to create a dominant voice for people like Donald Trump, that's only half the voice story, because the same company, Cambridge Analytica, was tied up with a company called software company called Palantir, whose job was to, just like in Lord of the Rings, make it so that what you looked online wasn't necessarily the full story, that they could actually control what you did see and what you didn't see. This is why it was actually named Palantir. So, you know, we're up against this sort of thing, and even, you know, during the Haitian earthquake 2010, which has been, you know, linked to things like electromagnetic warfare, that was an exercise, and whether it's true is not the point. But what is important is that when they ran that exercise, they also were running a software exercise to look at how people use the internet, so they could get better at basically countering and controlling what they do. This also recently repeated in the Tokyo US cyber warfare exercise, which occurred at the beginning of the year. Sorry, I can't remember the name. You'll have to look it up yourself. But again, it wasn't just a case of looking at how ways to stop hacking. It was looking at ways at how we use information so that they can actually control it. This is very 1984. It goes to the heart of 1984, which is where, again, books were burnt, and that the character Smith would be told a line one day, we're at war with Oceania, and the next day he'd be told to go out and delete that and say, oh no, we're our new friends are, so we've never been at war with Oceania because they're our best buddies. And so ultimately what you're looking at is we're going to the core of basically our ways to actually discern and get independent news and independent research. So again, you see all these things out there, like they say things like Snopes. Well, there's some really good articles out there if you go and look out there, showing the fact that Snopes is actually hired to push a political agenda. So what it's actually fact checking, which is, if you've ever used Snopes, you realise that they're actually pretty fucking flaky. While at the same time we get all this news about fake news, fake news, fake news. Case example would be the recent fires in Australia. We were told that originally, suggested that there were a large number of these fires were started by arson. As of January this year, all the mainstream newspapers out there have turned around and said, "Oh no, arson! The story about arson is all fake news, fake news." However, I'm again on my website recently. You go up and look at it. It's called Lie, Pants on Fire. I look at all the stories that go before January, which are listed to different cases of arson just within New South Wales. I have over 40 stories from basically mainstream news media, including the same organisations that said that arson was fake, which again just show you that the way that information is being actually managed and controlled. And a very important point when you look at something like the United States, where 10 years ago there were 11 major media outlets, today there are only 4. Again, you look at something like The Guardian, they have their own section there based on climate change report news. Now, it doesn't matter whether you believe it or not, that's not the point. The point is, you turn around and find that the funding of that actually comes from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who have been busily running around funding money all over the place, which basically suggests that anyone who has a question about the use of vaccines, and I, by the way, am actually a pro-vaccinator in the sense of I believe that the vaccines are A, managed properly, B, made properly, C, administrated correctly, they can actually do lots of good. However, when you get vaccines which are cheaply made, often sold beyond the use-by dates, administrated in a correct manner, they can actually cause a problem, which again, literature out there which you went to the National Archives should be able to find would verify that. No, you can't now, because now you're going to have to rely on all this information online using things like Microsoft and whatnot, who are owned by whom. So that's my main point today. It's a very brief little article, video I've been actually putting, and I'll put it on the bottom of my story of Barbarians at the Gates. But it's really the issue of the situation. If you want actually any proof that we're actually, we are being subject to an agenda-driven case of social engineering, which is controlling the information out there, you need to go look no further than your local library. I will also add one further point to that, two little case examples which occurred to me personally firsthand, which is how I became aware of what was going on with our libraries. The first was during 9/11, when I went to the Wellington Central Library in the capital city of New Zealand, and my purpose was to actually pull out the American newspapers and cross-reference them against what was actually online, so that I could make sure what was being people reporting about. The New York Times said this, or the Washington Post said that, was actually accurate. So, I thought it was very important stuff. I also wanted to backtrack, look at all the stories that occurred before, and that would give me additional information, which again wouldn't necessarily be picked up or be missed in the plethora of the reporting of that time. Well, when I went down there, I discovered that all the American papers were gone. And I went, what? And I went up to the front desk of the woman and I said, well, excuse me, but we're a significant event, probably biggest thing since Pearl Harbor. We're in a capital city. I've come down to research this material. Oh, I'm sorry, we get that information in all those newspapers provided to us by the US Embassy, and the US Embassy's decided no longer to provide those papers. I don't know if that's still a policy, but I was in Wellington for about 4 months after that, and in that entire time, there were no American papers that you could cross-reference against what was happening online to verify or, the opposite, which I thought was incredible. During the March 15th shooting, on the way back to Christchurch, I again stopped off the Wellington Library to do the same purpose of cross-referencing to make sure that my facts were actually accurate, doing due diligence and proper fact-checking. Again, that's when I find that the Wellington Library had been shut down again because of earthquake strengthening. And I think that leads me into another subject about what's happening with earthquake strengthening, which is very similar to the processes that occur out of the Kaikoura earthquake and the fires in Australia, which was then result in emergency legislation, which allows them to put through things that they wouldn't be able to otherwise. But for the purposes of actually controlling the information, I think that will actually suffice. So I will leave you with that short little video to mull over and think about. Have a good hard look about what's happening in your own area with the art galleries, the libraries, the ability to actually, even things like when you go to Christchurch Library, and I went there, very great, brand new library, went there, went to find out information that I'd previously written about in state secrets relating to things like Gun City and whatnot. Using my own bibliography from my own footbook, went there to actually get those primary documents again so I could photograph them, see what else I'd actually missed. Discover that no, I couldn't actually do that because I then had to go to a librarian who would then go to a central archive process and check it for me to see what was available. Again, that provides all sorts of means of actually being interfered with, and stops us from doing directly our research in an independent manner way without bias or prejudice. Thank you very much. You're Ben Vidgen on Ben's World, and that's easy enough to find on Google. You just go Ben's World, Postman Productions, you can't go wrong. Take care all, and be safe.